Imagine walking into a dealership just 2 years ago and being told that a used car model with 40,000 miles on it was selling for more than its original sticker price. People were lining up, desperate to buy anything with four wheels, paying record high prices, convinced that cars would only get more expensive. Now, fast forward to today. Those same vehicles are sitting on lots collecting dust, prices are plummeting, dealers are drowning in unsold inventory, and lenders are panicking as defaults quietly pile up. What once looked like unstoppable growth has turned into a collapse, and experts are now calling it the largest car market bubble in US history. But how did this bubble inflate so quickly, and why is it imploding even faster? The truth is, this wasn't just about supply and demand. It was a perfect storm of global shortages, government stimulus, corporate greed, and consumer desperation. When COVID disrupted supply chains, automakers slashed production, chip shortages, stalled assembly lines, and suddenly cars became one of the most valuable commodities in America. Dealers exploited the frenzy with markups that sometimes doubled sticker prices, and lenders approved sky-high loans that locked buyers into monthly payments bigger than their rent. Families thought they were making investments, but in reality, they were signing into one of the most dangerous debt traps of the decade. And here's where it gets truly alarming: those inflated values are now collapsing. Vehicles that were bought for $50,000 are suddenly worth $35,000. Truckloads of repossessed cars are hitting auction houses every week, hammering prices down even further. Banks are beginning to cut off risky lending, and analysts are warning that the automotive crash could ripple far beyond the dealerships, shaking consumer spending, crushing small-town economies, and even hitting the housing market next. But the real story isn't just about numbers, it's about people. The American dream of owning a car, the very symbol of freedom and independence, has now become a financial nightmare for millions. And the warning signs were there all along. So how bad will this get? Could this bubble trigger a wider economic fallout? Or is the auto industry just going through a painful reset? Take Jason, for example. He's a father of two in Ohio who bought a used 2020 Ford Explorer at the height of the frenzy. The dealer told him inventory was running out fast, that if he didn't act today, the car would be gone tomorrow. Jason stretched his budget, signed a 6-year loan at almost 10% interest, and drove home proud that he secured the last good SUV in town. For a while, he felt smart. But now, just 2 years later, the Explorer he owes $42,000 on is worth only $26,000. He can't sell it, he can't trade it, and he's stuck with monthly payments he can barely afford after food prices and rent soared. What was once a family, victory has turned into an anchor pulling him deeper into debt. Then there's Maria, a young nurse from Texas. She needed a car to get to work, and with new models impossible to find, she bought a 4-year-old Toyota Corolla for $28,000 nearly what it cost brand new. She justified it, telling herself Toyota holds its value. But now, as she watches used car prices free fall on dealer websites, she's sick to her stomach. Her loan balance is higher than what the car is worth, and she knows if she misses just a few payments, the lender won't hesitate to repossess it. Maria works 12-hour shifts saving lives, but her biggest fear is walking out of the hospital to an empty parking spot. And then there's Darren, a 24-year-old delivery driver in Florida. He was promised that buying a pickup truck was an investment. The dealer said prices were only going up and he could flip it later for a profit. He took out a massive loan on a Ram 1500, dreaming of side hustles and stability. But fuel prices ate up his earnings, insurance doubled, and now repossession agents are circling his neighborhood, looking for trucks exactly like his. Darren admits he feels trick sold not just a vehicle, but a lie about wealth and security. Stories like Jason's, Maria's, and Darren's aren't isolated. They're multiplying across America. Behind every falling chart and gloomy headline is a family watching their finances unravel, a worker choosing between groceries and a car note, a young adult realizing they were lured into a trap. The collapse isn't just happening in numbers, it's happening in people's lives right now, every single day. And here's the chilling part: it's only the beginning. With repossessions climbing and banks quietly tightening their grip, the next wave of this collapse could be even more devastating, not just for car buyers, but for the entire US economy. Let's peel back the curtain and show how this wasn't just a random market collapse. It was engineered, fueled, and profited from by the very institutions that claim to serve the American consumer. You see, the dealers weren't just innocent middlemen. When inventory tightened during the pandemic, they saw dollar signs. Markups of $5, $10, even $20,000 over sticker became the norm. But here's the kicker: banks and automakers encouraged it. Automakers cut production intentionally, keeping supply low so they could justify record high prices. Banks, eager for profits, extended massive loans with sky-high interest rates, even to buyers they knew couldn't realistically keep up with the payments. Why? Because they didn't care about the borrower, they cared about the loan. Those loans could be packaged, sold, and traded on Wall Street, just like the subprime mortgages that sparked the 2008 crash. And here's where it gets dark. Some lenders even embraced what insiders call negative equity stacking. That means, if someone was already upside down on their old loan, the bank would simply roll that debt into the new one, creating a mountain of financial quicksand. Buyers drove off the lot in shiny new vehicles, while unknowingly shackled to tens of thousands in debt they could never escape. Dealers knew, banks knew, automakers knew, but they all cashed in. Meanwhile, automakers themselves made record profits during the chaos. General Motors, Ford, Toyota, Stellantis quarter after quarter, they bragged to shareholders about soaring revenues, not from selling more cars, but from charging more for fewer cars. Their solution wasn't to help struggling buyers, it was to squeeze them harder, betting that Americans would pay any price for the freedom of owning a vehicle. And the banks, they saw cars not as essential tools for families, but as assets to repossess. Because when loans inevitably default, lenders get the car back, resell it at auction, and often still chase the borrower for the remaining balance. It's a win-win for them and a lose-lose for the consumer. So, this so-called bubble wasn't just an accident of supply chains and bad luck, it was deliberately inflated by an industry that saw opportunity in crisis. They created a system where desperation was monetized, where the average American's need for transportation became a golden goose to be bled dry. And now, as the bubble implodes, those same players are already moving to protect themselves, while ordinary people are left to pick up the wreckage. But here's the shocking twist most people don't see. The collapse of this bubble doesn't just hurt buyers, it could boomerang back onto the very institutions that built it. Because when repossessions flood the market, when loans go bad in record numbers, and when used car prices crash through the floor, even banks and automakers won't be safe. What's happening right now on the ground? Because the collapse isn't just some abstract financial warning, it's unfolding in plain sight at dealerships across America. Across the country, dealer lots that were empty just 2 years ago are now overflowing with vehicles. Trucks and SUVs are stacking up in rows so tightly that salesmen can barely walk between them. In some regions, storage yards are being rented out just to hold the excess inventory, and yet buyers aren't coming. With interest rates crushing affordability and household debt at record highs, Americans simply can't take on another massive car payment. Dealers who once bragged about market adjustments are now quietly slashing prices, offering thousands in incentives and even bringing back zero-down deals just to move metal. But here's the problem: it's too little, too late. Take Ford, for example. Dealers are sitting on piles of unsold F-150s, once considered the safest bet in the auto market. Ram has fields of pickups languishing in the sun, waiting for buyers who aren't showing up. Nissan's Titan is practically begging for attention, with discounts so steep they'd have been unthinkable just a year ago. And even Toyota, long considered bulletproof, is facing mounting pressure as new models arrive faster than customers can sign the paperwork. Salespeople, once arrogant during the boom, are now calling back old leads, begging former customers to come in and talk numbers. Loan approvals that used to take minutes are now dragging on as lenders tighten their belts. And behind the scenes, automakers are scrambling. Some are cutting production lines, while others are preparing for mass layoffs, hoping to stop them bleeding before it spirals further. The panic is real. You can see it in the desperate advertising, record-breaking discounts, employee pricing extended, trade-in bonus cash. Phrases that mask the truth. The bubble has popped, and they're scrambling to cover the cracks. Dealers are facing monthly floor plan costs interest they owe, all that unsold inventory draining their profits faster than the discounts can save them. Automakers are pushing them to take even more vehicles they can't sell, forcing a standoff that threatens to break the fragile dealer network itself. And this is where it gets really dangerous. Because when lots are full, when cars won't move, and when banks refuse to hand out easy loans, the entire system stalls. The car industry isn't built for stability, it's built for constant motion. If that motion stops, even briefly, the shockwaves ripple out to suppliers, workers, and eventually the entire US economy. Now the question becomes, how far will automakers and dealers go to survive this collapse? And what tricks will they use to lure desperate buyers back into a market that's already burned so many? This isn't just a car problem. It's shaping up to be an economic crisis with ripple effects far beyond the dealership lot. The US auto industry is one of the largest employers in the country, directly and indirectly supporting nearly 10 million jobs. When automakers slow down production because cars aren't selling, that pain doesn't stop at the assembly line. It spreads. Factory shifts get cut, and workers who were already stretched thin lose ours or their jobs entirely. Suppliers, from tire manufacturers to electronics companies, see their orders vanish overnight. Truck drivers who haul cars across the country suddenly have fewer loads to move. Even small-town diners near auto plants start to feel it because when workers stop earning, they stop spending, and here's where it hits the wider economy. Autos are deeply tied to credit. For years, car loans have been one of the biggest chunks of consumer debt right behind mortgages. When buyers default, banks take the hit. If enough defaults pile up, lenders start pulling back, not just on auto loans, but across the board, making it harder for Americans to borrow for houses, businesses, or even personal credit cards. Sound familiar? That's exactly how the 2008 housing crash spiraled outward into a full-blown financial crisis. Local economies, especially in states like Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky, and Tennessee, are especially vulnerable. A slowdown in auto demand there can trigger mini recessions, with layoffs rippling from the plants to the mom-and-pop shops that depend on auto workers' paychecks. Meanwhile, Wall Street investors who poured billions into auto-backed securities are starting to get nervous. If those loans sour, it won't just be dealers and lenders hurting. Pension funds, hedge funds, and retirement accounts tied to those investments could all take a blow. Even housing could feel the shock. Families drowning in car debt can't qualify for mortgages. People losing their vehicles often struggle to get to work, putting their jobs and their homes at risk. It's a domino effect, and the first pieces are already falling. This is why some economists are calling the auto collapse a potential silent recession. It doesn't grab headlines like a stock market crash, but its slow bleed through jobs, debt, and spending power could quietly drag the entire economy downward. And yet, while ordinary Americans are bracing for impact, the corporations that fuel this bubble are already maneuvering to shield themselves. Automakers are lobbying Washington for incentives, banks are tightening lending rules to protect their margins, and dealers are preparing to dump inventory at massive losses. Everyone is scrambling for cover. Everyone, that is, except the buyers who were left holding the bag. The chilling parallels to 2008. The moment when America's financial foundations cracked under the weight of another bubble everyone thought could never burst. Back then, it was houses. People believed home values would rise forever, that debt didn't matter because they could always refinance or sell at a profit. Banks encouraged it, packaging risky mortgages into shiny financial products and selling them off to investors who didn't bother looking under the hood. The average American thought they were building wealth, when in reality, they were sitting on a powder keg, and when it blew, the fallout was catastrophic. Families lost homes, banks went under, jobs vanished, and the economy plunged into the deepest recession in generations. Now, look at the auto market today. The story is eerily familiar. Instead of houses, it's cars. Instead of subprime mortgages, it's subprime auto loans. Instead of Wall Street selling mortgage-backed securities, it's auto loan-backed securities, bundles of risky car debt being traded right now, under the assumption that borrowers will somehow keep paying. But the warning signs are flashing, repossessions climbing, delinquency rates surging, used car values falling, and lenders tightening credit. The exact same dominoes we saw topple in 2008 are lined up again, just in a different industry. And the most frightening part? This time the squeeze on consumers is even worse. In 2008, many families were drowning in housing debt, but at least they had the roof over their heads. With the auto bubble, people are going under over something that depreciates the second you drive it off the lot. Millions of Americans are trapped in negative equity, owing thousands more than their cars are worth, with no way out but default. When those defaults accelerate and the auto-backed securities market could unravel just like mortgage-backed securities did in 2008, pulling Wall Street, banks, and everyday retirement funds down with it. Economists call this the makings of a silent recession because it won't come with fireworks or a sudden crash on Wall Street. It will creep in slowly, household by household, repo lot by repo lot, dealership liquidation by liquidation. Jobs will quietly disappear, small businesses will slowly wither, and consumer spending, the engine of the US economy, will sputter. By the time the headlines catch up, the damage will already be done, and yet, if you listen to automakers and banks, you'll hear the same confident lines we heard in 2007. The fundamentals are strong. The risks are contained. There's nothing to worry about. They want you to believe this is just a hiccup. But behind the polished press releases, their actions tell a different story: slashing production, cutting credit, lobbying Washington for bailouts. Just like before, the insiders are quietly preparing for a storm they publicly denied. So the real question is, are we staring at the early stages of a full-blown financial contagion, or will the auto bubble collapse remain contained? If history is any guide, ignoring the warning signs never ends well. Americans never see Wall Street's fingerprints all over this bubble, because while it's easy to blame greedy dealers and reckless buyers, the truth is far more sinister. Just like in the housing crisis, the beating heart of this bubble is on Wall Street, where car loans aren't just loans, they're assets. Every time a consumer signed a 6 or 7-year car note, that debt was bundled together with thousands of others, packaged into complex financial products called asset-backed securities. To investors, these look like safe baits. People always need cars, right? They'll keep paying no matter what, right? That's the same logic that fueled the mortgage-backed securities disaster of 2008. And just like back then, rating agencies stamped these bundles with high grades, telling pension funds, hedge funds, and even foreign governments that they were secure investments. But what happens when the borrower is underneath ordinary? Americans crushed by inflation, rising interest rates, and stagnant wages start missing payments. Those securities start to rot from the inside out. Here's the chilling part. Wall Street knew they had the data. They saw that negative equity was skyrocketing, that more and more buyers were underwater the moment they drove off the lot. They knew repossessions were rising even before the headlines did. But instead of pulling back, they doubled down, feeding the bubble because the short-term profits were too sweet to resist. Billions flowed into auto debt, even as the foundations crumbled. And just like in the mortgage crisis, there's an ugly underbelly of exploitation. Subprime auto loans given to people with shaky credit and little chance of paying them off were some of the most profitable products for lenders and Wall Street alike. Some of these loans carried interest rates north of 20%, trapping desperate buyers in contracts that practically guaranteed failure. Lenders didn't care, because every failed loan meant a repossessed car they could resell and a security they'd already sold off to investors. The risk wasn't theirs. It was ours. Now, here's where the suspense tightens. Some analysts are warning that Wall Street isn't just passively involved, it may actually benefit from the collapse. Hedge funds can short auto lenders, bet against auto securities, and profit off the implosion just like they did during the housing crash. In other words, while ordinary Americans lose their cars, their credit, and sometimes their livelihoods, there are investors quietly planning to make billions off the wreckage. And if history has taught us anything, it's that once Wall Street is entangled, the fallout is never contained, because those same securities are tied to retirement accounts, to mutual funds, to the very financial scaffolding that supports millions of Americans who don't even know they're exposed. The collapse of the auto bubble isn't just about cars, it's about whether Wall Street has set us up for another chain reaction like 2008. Now, the question lingers like a storm cloud. Is this just a market correction, or is the auto bubble the first crack in America's next financial earthquake? Well, the public is only just beginning to sense something's wrong. Washington has been watching the storm clouds gather for months. Behind closed doors, regulators, Treasury officials, and even Federal Reserve economists are quietly running stress tests. They know what's coming, even if they're not saying it out loud. Leaked memos and insider whispers suggest that the government has already modeled scenarios where auto loan defaults spike to levels not seen since the Great Recession. And the numbers they're seeing aren't small, they're catastrophic. In some models, 1 in 5 subprime auto borrowers could be in default within the next year if interest rates and inflation stay high. That's millions of people losing cars, millions of loans going bad, and billions in securities unraveling. The Federal Reserve, already under fire for its interest rate hikes, is in a bind. If they keep rates high to fight inflation, they risk crushing auto borrowers further, accelerating defaults. But if they lower rates to ease the burden, they risk reigniting the very inflation they've sworn to tame. It's a no-win scenario, and they know it. Meanwhile, consumer protection agencies have quietly ramped up investigations into predatory lending practices, those 20% plus interest loans, the negative equity stacking, and the fine print tricks that locked families into financial traps. Regulators are preparing reports, but don't mistake their silence for inaction. They're building a case, gathering data, and waiting for the moment this crisis becomes undeniable before stepping onto the stage. And here's the most telling sign: automakers themselves are lobbying harder than ever in Washington. Ford, GM, Stellantis, and others are quietly pushing for federal incentives, subsidies, and temporary relief measures to soften the blow. They're not asking because they're confident, they're asking because they're scared. They know their factories, suppliers, and dealer networks could crumble if this spiral continues unchecked. Even lawmakers who just a year ago were bragging about record car sales and a resilient consumer are beginning to shift their tone. In private hearings, questions are being asked that echo 2008. How exposed are our banks? How safe are Americans' retirement accounts? How quickly could this spread into housing or credit cards? They're not admitting it publicly, but behind the scenes, Washington is bracing for a financial firestorm they feared they might not be able to contain. And perhaps the most ominous signal of all, some insiders are floating the idea of a bailout, not for consumers drowning in debt, but for the very automakers and lenders who inflated this bubble in the first place. History doesn't just rhyme, it repeats. Once again, ordinary Americans could be left holding the bag, while the architects of the collapse get rescued.